on to new autism. Well, it's not new per se. I think this is released in 2018 was when the main one. Me and Monotropism, a unified theory of autism. And this is the actual paper that we might read through, but I might actually fail at saying half the names of. Fergus Murray. Autism is still widely seen as mysterious, so much that the mostly widely recognized symbol of it, unpopular to the autistic community, is a puzzle piece. Various psychological theories of autism hasn't helped that much, largely because all of the most established ones leave vast swathes of autistic experience completely untouched and tend to leave people with harmful misconceptions. One theory I think comes anywhere close to explaining the whole shebang, monotropism, has largely been overlooked by psychologists. This rackles with me as an autistic adult. As a science teacher, and full disclosure, as the offspring of the theory's originator, Dia Murray, as someone on the spectrum myself, the thing with the theory's originator, she never realized she had it until she was later in her life, because her son was already diagnosed with it to some degree. And as someone on the spectrum myself, I dislike the pathologizing, defective-based framing of the best-known theories of autism, and I hate the mistakes they lead into practice, assuming we lack empathy and have no idea what's going on in anyone else's head, painting the autistic cognition as inherently more male, expecting skills we're slow to pick up as kids to be lacking throughout our lives. It bothers me as a scientist almost as much as it bothers me as an autist that psychologists settle for theories of autism which simply fail to provide any explanation for so much of the autistic thinking. Granted, my background's in physics and philosophy rather than psychology, but I've always understood that when your theory is only partially explains the phenomenon being examined, you should keep looking for a better theory. When there are persistent threads left unexplained, such as the sensory differences so common among autistic adults, you really need a more complete framework. Partial theories can be useful, but it's all too easy to stretch them beyond their domain of application. There, ha! I'll just use that word. And it causes real problems, like assuming autistic adults have no theory of mind. Maybe it's my autistic perfectionism, but I don't like theories that leave too many loose ends. Monotropism provides a far more comprehensive explanation for autistic cognition than any of its competitors, so it has been good to see it finally starting to get more recognition among psychologists, such as the Sue Fletcher Watson's keynote talk of 2018 Autistic Conference. In a nutshell, monotropism is a tendency for our interests to pull us more strongly than most people. It rests in a model of the mind as an interest system. We're all interested in many things, and our interests help direct our attention. Different interests are salient at different times. In a monotropic mind, fewer interests tend to be aroused at any time. They attract more of our processing resources, making it difficult to deal with things outside our current attention tunnel. Which is the classic paper on this, which I have right here that we'll read in a second, is the attention monotropism and the diagnostic criteria for autism. Largely focuses on how the theory provides convincing accounts of all the features of autism listed in the diagnostic manuals and ties them together in a way other theories fail. The authors do a persuasive job of this, but I feel the diagnostic criteria is so lacking when it comes to accounting for the experiences of autism that I'm not going to use that framing. Instead, I'll focus on some key features of autism as seen from the inside. Autistic inertia, sensory differences, and I'm going to give examples since I am autistic of problems that I have that might go along with this. And also, we'll be going to the Monotropism site, and there is a actual test for that, but I've already been officially diagnosed as autistic, like medically, so so I can't say exactly probably say yes that I have it, because obvious, but I mean, if you want to take it, so, because autism, especially in adults, is usually overlooked because we've figured out ways of masking or hiding what people generally think of autism. Or like in the case of most females, as they say that there are no female autistics. So, anyways. Social differences and focused interests. I close with some thoughts on implications for practice, the role of developmental perspectives, and potential research directions. Autistic inertia. The bulk of what's usually referred to executive dysfunction in autism, difficulties getting going with things, executing plans, and tearing ourselves away from things once we've started. I wonder why these science streams started. No clue. Are more informally talked about as autistic inertia. That is, resistance to change in a state, difficulty starting, stopping, or changing directions. This is central to many of the difficulties autistic people face in life, but it is also part of what makes autistic thinking distinctive and valuable. I'm a little uncomfortable with executive dysfunction as a label for this because it makes it seem like it's a problem with steering, which, I mean, yeah, not wrong. It's more helpful to think of the momentum of thought carrying us forward, often to conclusions that others might have missed. Thinking of terms of inertia, it also gives some insight into discomfort of being interrupted or plans changing. It's as if we've loaded a cart to the brim with thoughts and feelings, and we suddenly had to steer it around a sharp corner. Like, I'm going to give examples of this, is when in conversations where the conversation has kind of changed to a different topic, and I'm still on the old topic trying to talk about it, and not realizing it until I go over the conversation afterwards in my mind because I want to fit in and I don't want to look stupid, and you realize later that the people were annoyed and the reason why they were changing the conversation was because they wanted to talk about something else. This tendency follows naturally from monotropism. Whatever interest is most aroused in a monotropic mind tends to pull a whole lot of processing resources. That naturally makes it harder to change track, especially when you understand that paths of our thought always leave an imprint in our minds, and autistic ones leave deeper grooves than they might on an average mind. Sensory differences. It's easier for autistic people to process one channel at a time. Disturbing our attention between multiple streams takes effort, and sometimes it just doesn't work at all. Again, monotropism is characterized by intensity of where our focus is, at the cost of processing resources that might otherwise be used to deal with other inputs or interests. Interesting about me is I actually concentrate better when I'm doing artwork, but listening to, say, a book on tape or like a podcast or something, because it's like my hands are moving. Doesn't seem like it makes sense because you'd think that I'd be paying attention to more than one things at once kind of thing would be overwhelming with monotropism, but I guess it akin to like flapping your hands or whatever, stimming, except it's drawing. I used to draw a lot at school when I was taking notes, so annoyed the hell out of one of my teachers. There was one teacher that had this long it wasn't a yardstick, it was longer than a yardstick, and basically it was long enough that he would tap it on your desk if he thought that you weren't paying attention, even if you were in the back of the fucking room. Again, monotropism is characterized by intensity wherever our focus is at the cost of preceding resources that might otherwise be used to deal with other inputs or interests. This is often a problem in social situations. Autism is occasionally mistaken for deafness, especially in small children. If our attention is elsewhere, auditory input might register as an unwelcome interruption we would much rather ignore, or it might not register at all. Conversely, if we can't tune an input out, it is often experienced as a horribly intrusive. I think that is from a combination of discomfort at our attention being constantly pulled away from where we want it to be, with a tendency to feel something strongly if it's present in our awareness at all. One of the things that I work very hard not to get angry is when I'm talking to people and they want me to search something up while continuing to talk about something, the subject, when I'm trying to figure out like say that we're doing a server night watching something, and I have a problem with why the screen isn't working, and I'm trying to figure out why the screen isn't working with the sound or whatever, and they're still trying to talk to me about different solutions to what they think it is, and I'm trying to real quickly figure out if it's something on my end, and they're throwing out suggestions while I'm trying to figure out, first of all, to get the thought process of, quartering it down to certain things. And then while we're doing that, they start bringing up a different topic that they want my answer for that's kind of different from what we're talking about, but I'm still trying to figure out how to get the damn screen to work. And so I'm trying to hold back my anger at them trying to talk to me about something else while I'm trying to get the what's working for the server, and it's just it's something. Tend to feel something strongly if present in our awareness of it. Our brain throws out a lot of resources to at whatever our focus is on, which accounts to both the intensity of conscious awareness and the pain of distracting stimuli we can't filter out. There's likely a developmental aspect to this. Neural pathways that receive a lot of stimulation grow stronger, so perhaps autistic people are prone to long-term hypersensitivity and senses receiving intense attention and undersensitivity in channels we regularly tune out. Often, if we get overloaded, it helps to have controlled, predictable input. Stimming, flapping, rocking, humming provides something we can do and feel without having to think about it. I have problems with humming. Messing with my skin, like picking at my skin when I don't realize it, especially if I'm driving. In fact, to the point where my mom usually grabs my hand. And can be much easier to filter to focus on something else or deal with feelings of overwhelming. Social differences. Many social differences are sensory differences at root. Being unable to process multiple channels of input most of the time makes the combination of spoken words, body language, and eye contact extremely challenging. Add autistic inertia to the mix, we can also see why autistic people often need more processing time and find the back and forth of neurotypical conversation difficult to keep up with. Monotropic processing is also an example of the literal mindness that autistic people are notorious for. Polytropic minds have multiple interests aroused at any time, pulling in multiple strands of information, both external and internal. They are primed to be on the lookout for things like social implications and effortlessly decode metaphors and indirect language. The monotropic mind tends to expect one thing to follow from another more directly than that. Most autistic people get the hang of metaphors eventually. I can do sarcasm. Half the time. But many still report the literal meaning of a saying tends to come first to mind, and then it takes a moment processing to substitute the metaphorical intent. Exactly! Autistic focus tends to mean we miss a lot of things that other people register, but other people probably just miss just as many things. It's just different things. Psychologists like Peter Vermeulen talked about context blindness, a useful concept, but we all construct our own context all the time. And the better way of thinking about this is probably the mismatch of salience, to borrow a title of Damon Milton's essay collection. I might miss your context, but don't assume you understand mine without checking. A lot of processing power goes into modeling other minds, something that can seem effortless but never trivial. It becomes much harder when the minds in question are very different from your own. When autistic people fail to do this, it's not so much as that we're unable to. The idea of mind blindness is deeply misleading, but that we don't always have the processing power left over to do it effectively when our attention is being pulled strongly in another direction. Focus interests. Interests that are the heart of monotropism account and have been present in the characterizations of autism right from the start. Their near absence from the more established theories of autism, and indeed the entire psychological literature on autism, is glaring. The diagnostic criteria talk about restricted and repetitive interests, but the main characteristics featured of autistic special interests is really how we focus on them, or how they focus us. Not how restrictive or repetitive they are. Everyone's passions are repetitive. That's just in the nature of strong interests. When people talk about restrictive interests, what they mostly seem to mean is that they can't fathom our failure to be interested in things that seem important to them. It is true that we're often powerfully interested in a few things for a relatively long time, but they do change over the years and sometimes over much shorter periods of time. For my part, I have many interests, some of them fascinations since childhood, most of them all time consuming when I get into them. Chatting with autistic adults about things that interest them often makes the idea that their interests are restrictive seem preposterous. And think of how many interests I have. I have too many. What is true is our interest pulls us in very strongly and persistently compared to with most people. It can be hard to think about anything else when we're practically invested in a topic, and hard to imagine how little other people might care about it. That can be a huge asset in many fields. Intense focus is indispensable in science, maths, technologies, music, art, and philosophy, among others. Obviously, autistic people are not the only ones capable of hyper-focused and persistent interests. But it is a common feature of autistic psyche, one that is often too often squandered when workplaces and schools are not set up to allow it. Implications for practice. The biggest practical thing to take away from this is the importance of meeting the child or adult where they are. This is not an insight unique to the monotropism perspective, but it's nothing else I've seen demonstrates with such clarity why it's so crucial. Treat interests as something to work with. Recognize what someone's passionate about, and learn how to become a part of the attention tunnels which come with monotropic focus, rather than trying to reach in and pull the person out of the flow states that are so important to us. Never pathologize special interests, and don't assume that autistic interests are restrictive. There are plenty of ways to get us interested in new things. It's just they mostly involve taking existing interests and building on them. Stability is a basic human need, and life as a monotropic person in a polytropic world is often unstable. It is deeply destabilizing to be put out of an attention tunnel, to be regularly surprised by people's actions, or feel like you're not being understood. Much of autistic behavior can be seen as attempts to restore that equilibrium. Restrictive, repetitive behaviors are natural response to feelings of instability. They allow you to assert control over what's happening and feel safer. This is probably a useful general rule, not something that's only true in autism. We see restrictive repetitive behaviors in all sorts of contexts. It's mostly just that autistic people's ones stand out as particularly odd to most people. Helping autistic people maintain a sense of stability should be a priority for those around them. It's understood widely that routines can often help autistic people, but I'm not sure it's widely understood why. What's a routine? A lot of it is minimizing mental load, taking out things that we have to think about so we can maintain focus. Another big part of it is that changing plans involves such a mental shift that it's exhausting. The ability to feel in control is central to all this, and externally imposed routines sometimes backfire for that reason. Frustrations and anxiety about control can manifest in demand avoidance, meltdown, and shutdowns at times. Sorry, taking a drink. No theory about minds is complete unless it's dynamic and developmental. We are all changing it all the time, and big parts of what makes autistic people different have to do with heading down different development paths. Whatever cause a failure to connect with people around you, especially parents, is going to have long-term implications for a person and how they relate to others around them. Perhaps even bigger is that the disorientation faced regularly by so many autistic children, coupled with the retching dislocations as they are forced to change tracks again and again to suit other people's schedules. High levels of stress and anxiety have far-reaching effects on a person's long-term mental and physical health, and it can be difficult to disentangle some of those from the traits that follow directly from autistic ways of thinking. The developmental perspective is partially crucial to because we go on learning throughout our lives, and some of the things that are impossibly difficult when we are young gets much easier over time once we start focusing on them and practicing. This does not mean we stop being autistic. All signs are that monotropic brain is for life, but it does mean that many of the traits that are considered telltale signs of autism in children can only be sometimes seen in autistic adults. Different experiences in youth and throughout life, and particularly the different choices we make about where we focus our attention, are likely to account for a good chunk of the diversity of ways that autism can present. Growing up in a household where eccentricity was embraced and hyperfocus was understood probably helped me grow into a relatively confident adult, and not an especially anxious one. Neither myself nor my mother grew up thinking ourselves as autistic, but we were allowed to be weird, and that makes a big difference. Part of the variation in autism is also likely due to the different degrees of monotropism. It can be suggested that the trait might follow normal distribution, with some people being very monotropic, while others, perhaps the world's natural multitaskers and people regulars, are unusually polytropic. However, the trait is distributed, and the implication is that some people are closer to having autistic minds than others without qualifying as autistic themselves, and some autistic people have more atypical minds than those in terms of monotropism. This doesn't make the spectrum linear. There are so many different ways in which autism to manifest, and so many co-occurring conditions that no one variable can come close to capturing them all. Implications for research. If, as I've argued, monotropism, I'm probably gonna, by the way, since I'm gonna leave this in the, probably won't read this aloud. Think about it. I'll just leave it in the description of the actually, no, I will. Or would the Monotropism website probably would be better to read aloud that. Not nearly as mysterious. Monotropism provides a common underlying explanation for all the main features of autism psychology. Then autism is not nearly as mysterious as people think. We do not need to rely on theories which explain only a few aspects of the autistic cognition, with no convincing explanation for the sensory hyper and hyposensitivity, which is the opposite of hyper, or the intensity of autistic interests. Why then is monotropism not already better known, despite the flourishing attention in recent years? I believe the reasons are more sociological than psychological. When Attention Monotropism was published in 2005, none of the three authors were professional psychologists, although one has a PhD in psycholinguistics and has worked extensively with people in the autism spectrum. Another, Wynne Lawson, received a PhD later for further work in this theory, with their thesis Single Attention and Cognition in Autism, since turned into the book A Passionate Mind. Lawson had an official diagnosis of autism, which should be an asset for anyone working in autism, but is still seen by some as to undermine credibility instead. The other two were undiagnosed. None were enmeshed in the world of professional psychology, and despite Lawson's book pointing to several possible tests, they do not seem to have known which strings to pull to make the psychologists conduct the empirical work needed to rigorously test monotropism. Okay. All right. Sue Fletcher Watson, a psychologist in the field, pointed out often psychology, a new theory, is built up on top of an empirical finding, but what has happened certainly is with the theory of mind, which rooted in 1985 experimental study by Simon Bo-Cohen, Alan Leslie, and Ut Frieden. For non-autistic psychologists, there is no lived experience of autism of which to build a theoretical model, so experimental data has to come first. This could be another reason why autistic-led theories, drawn at least in part by internal observations, struggle to make a big impact on mainstream research. Anyways, the nations. What is monotropism, by the way? I should have probably known about that. What is monotropism? But I think that other article did. Is a neurodiversity affirming theory of autism. Autistic ADHD, DHD people are more likely to be monotropic. Monotropic people have an interest based on nervous system. This means they focus more on their attention resources on fewer things at any one time compared to other people who may be polytropic. Things outside an attention tunnel may get missed, and moving between attention tunnels can be difficult and take lots of energy. Monotropism can have positive and negative impacts on sensory, social, and communication needs depending on environment and support provided and how a person manages their mind and body. Yeah, by the way, having periods absolutely was horrifying because trying to jump between different subjects when I was really into it. These are videos. How long is this video? It's 4 minutes long. Let's see. Abstract interpretation.
Monotropism. Setting up the science.
Setting up the science.
The theory of monotropism describes the way in which autistic people's neurology processes sensory information, engages with something in order to give it our full focused attention, works to move our attention from one thing to another, and validates autistic experience in a non-pathological way. In order to give anything our full attention, we need to build up inertia, allowing our sensory systems time to align themselves with what we're focusing on.
I can understand
What's
this.
happening in that time is the monotropic brain is looking for an a hook, something to spark its interest. What does it look and feel like? Autistic people experience attention very differently to non-autistic people.
You're not
Once
wrong.
it has found that hook, the autistic brain is able to lock onto it, but the focus of our attention has more mass than anything else in our environment. It's like a black hole. Its gravity drags us in. We're pulled towards it with immense force, hurtling through a tunnel of attention.
Hey, kind of like how
We
I
then
get really into
experience a
games.
state of flow, where the object of our attention becomes all-encompassing. Inside that flow state, we can have incredibly intense experiences. It enables us to explore topics at great depths and complete tasks to a high degree of proficiency. It can feel incredibly good to access a flow state around your passions,
I know,
increasing
it really
your
is.
levels of enjoyment and satisfaction, and thus increasing the intensity of the flow. If an autistic person is in an environment in which they feel unsafe, sensorially or emotionally, greater monotropic depth can be needed to cut out those negative sensations. Conversely, unsafe places and situations can dysregulate us too much, so that we're unable to build enough inertia to get into a flow state. Why is it important to know this? If you aren't aware of monotropic neurology, it can be easy to assume that while in a flow state, an autistic person is deliberately disengaged, deliberately not listening, or not paying attention on purpose. This is all classified negatively as challenging behaviour, but is not the case. It can be easy to assume that an autistic person should transition between states of attention as quickly as non-autistic people do. But coming out of your attention tunnel and moving your attention from one thing to another can be difficult and take time.
Yeah, and anger.
You're pulling the weight of your being
hurts.
out of a gravity well, and afterwards you need to realign your sensorial and emotional state, and then refocus on the next thing that needs your attention. If an autistic person is pulled out of monotropic flow too quickly, it causes our sensory systems to dysregulate. This in turn triggers us into emotional dysregulation, and we quickly find ourselves in a state ranging from uncomfortable, to grumpy, to angry, or even triggered into a meltdown or a shutdown. This reaction is also often classed as challenging behaviour, when really it is an expression of distress caused by the behaviour of those around us. how you can get things wrong, not preparing for transitions, too many instructions, speaking too quickly, not allowing processing time, using demanding language, using rewards or punishments instead of intrinsic motivation, poor sensory environments, poor communication environments, making assumptions, and a lack of insightful and informed staff reflection.
I get fired so much. There's something about double empathy. Autism affects how someone makes sense of the world. About 1 to 2% of people are autistic. You might have an autistic classmate or family member, or maybe you are autistic. Autistic people might communicate different than people who are not autistic. This means it can be difficult for other people to understand what autistic people are trying to say or what they mean. That's the reason why often I will over-explain, is because I'm afraid you aren't getting what I'm meaning. Because I don't think it doesn't look like, or I don't think that you understand where I'm coming from, all this other stuff. We tend to think that people who are not autistic might be more successful at understanding other people, but in fact, autistic people may be better understood by other autistic people. We'll examine and explain some research that has explored how autistic and non-autistic people communicate with each other, and explore how this research fits within a theory called double empathy problem. Understanding what makes interaction comfortable and easy for different people can help us understand each other better. What is the double empathy problem? Can you tell when someone is bored or frustrated or upset with you, even if they do not say so? People often communicate information about themselves without saying a word. The expression on their faces or ways they're acting can be big clues on what they might be feeling or thinking. Being autistic affects how people make sense of the world around them, and some autistic people can find it hard to communicate. For a long time, research has shown that autistic people can have trouble figuring out what non-autistic people are thinking and feeling, and this can make it difficult for them to make friends or fit in. But recently, studies have shown that the problem goes both ways. People who are not autistic also have trouble figuring out what autistic people are thinking and feeling. It's not just autistic people who struggle. A theory that helps describe what happens when autistic and non-autistic people struggle to understand each other is called the double empathy problem. Empathy is defined as the ability to understand or be aware of the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of others. According to the double empathy problem, empathy is a two-way process that depends a lot on our ways of doing things and our expectations from previous social experiences, which can be very difficult for autistic and non-autistic people. These differences can lead to a breakdown in communication that can be distressing for both autistic and non-autistic people. It might be something difficult for non-autistic parents to understand what their autistic child is feeling, or autistic people might feel frustrated when they cannot effectively communicate their thoughts and feelings to others. In this way, communication barriers between autistic and non-autistic people can make it more difficult for them to connect, share experiences, and empathize with each other. Double empathy. Autistic person may struggle to read between the lines, overcome other people's conceptions about autism, manage sensory distractions. Both parties may struggle to understand each other's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and differences. May struggle to form positive first impressions. Recognize and understand autism. Imagine autistic sensory difficulties. Let us look at the example of reading between the lines. This is when you understand something that someone means, even if they have not said it with words. For example, your friend might say his day has been okay, but sigh and seem grumpy or sad. Reading between the lines, you might guess that your friend's day has been not okay at all. Autistic people might struggle to read between the lines of what non-autistic people are saying, because this way of communication does not come easily to autistic people. On the other hand, non-autistic people might make incorrect assumptions about autistic people because they are reading between the lines too much. Autistic people can find it exhausting and confusing to understand non-autistic ways of communication. Likewise, non-autistic people might feel uncomfortable when they are around autistic people because their usual ways of communications do not work well. This mismatch between social expectations and experiences can make communicating between autistic and non-autistic people difficult. That is why building understanding and empathy is described as a double problem. Speaking of which, by the way, one of the things, I guess because also the monotropism, is I actually feel like I connect better with people when I'm not looking at them, when I'm speaking through like Discord and stuff, because I don't have to pay attention. There's a certain amount of I'm not sure of what their facial expressions is, so I can't be sure of certain things, but I also don't have to focus on grading their facial and body expressions. One way scientists understand double empathy is to see if people who are not autistic judge autistic and non-autistic people differently. Unfortunately, when people who are not autistic find it hard to understand autistic people, they're less likely, they tend to like them less. In fact, it takes just a few seconds for people who are not autistic to form negative first impressions about autistic people. Non-autistic people are quickly becoming less interested in interacting with autistic people than other non-autistic people, which means that autistic people may have fewer opportunities to meet people and friends. Why does this happen? It's not because autistic people talk about things that are less interesting. When non-autistic people read the words of what autistic people are saying, they do not judge them any differently than they would judge non-autistic people. Sounds familiar with some group of friends. So it really seems that how autistic people appear and sound, and not what they talk about, that leads non-autistic people to judge and avoid autistic people. Sadly, this means autistic people might have fewer opportunities to make friends or get jobs because of how non-autistic people judge them, which is not fair. Another way to explore double empathy is to see if autistic people connect with other autistic people more easily than they do with people who are not autistic. This is exactly what some new studies are showing. Autistic people want to talk to other autistic people, sit next to them, or live near them more than they want to do with things with non-autistic people. One study, 2 unfamiliar adults got to know each other by talking for 5 minutes. Sometimes the 2 adults were both non-autistics, sometimes both autistics, sometimes one of each. You might expect, if autistic people are poor in social interactions, that the conversations between 2 autistic people would go especially badly. That's not what the study found. The quality of interactions between 2 autistic people was just as strong between 2 people who were not autistic. Autistic people even shared more information about themselves with other autistic people, suggesting they felt more comfortable with them. This shows that autistic people are like everyone else. They find it easier to connect with and maybe even form friendships with people who think and communicate like them. Why might autistic people find it easier to understand other autistic people? Research indicates that autistic people are less likely to rely on typical social expectations for interacting, or be upset if such expectations are not followed. This means that autistic people give each other more freedom to express themselves in unique ways. We can see evidence of this by looking at how well autistic and non-autistic people share information with each other. One recent study was based on the game Telephone, in which one person whispers a message to another person, who then whispers it to the next person, and so on. The last person then says the message aloud to see how different it is from what the first person said. Researchers compared how accurately the group of autistic people, groups of non-autistic people, and groups with a mix of autistic and non-autistic people shared a story of the game of Telephone. They found that autistic groups share information just as accurately as non-autistic groups. Mixed groups of autistic and non-autistic people were much less accurate. This shows that autistic people are just as able to share information as non-autistic people if they are with other autistic people. This supports the theory of double empathy problem, that there's two-way difficulty when autistic and non-autistic people react. What do we need to learn about the double empathy problem? So far, studies of the double empathy problem have focused mainly on teenagers and adults, and it would be important to see if the results differ for younger children. For example, if it turns out the non-autistic children are more positive about autistic people than non-autistic adults are, this would tell us that the negative attitudes about autistic people are not destined to happen, but are learned over time. It also because autistic children are more likely now in the past to be included in classes and activities with non-autistic children. This may provide more opportunities for autistic and non-autistic children to interact and learn from one another. These increased opportunities for interaction may help autistic and non-autistic people understand each other and decrease the double empathy problem over time. Additionally, studies so far have only included autistic people who are highly verbal and do not have an intellectual disability. According to the theory, double empathy problem would be even greater between non-autistic people and autistic people who have an intellectual disability. But further research is needed to see if this is the case. Another avenue of research is to explore the effects of familiarity of a relationship. For example, how does the double empathy problem differ from communicating with strangers versus a family member? Family members share backgrounds, experiences, and environments, which suggests the double empathy problem may be reduced within familiar relationships. However, research has shown that familiar relationships can create additional barriers. For example, thinking we know someone well might prevent us from listening and understanding what is really trying to be communicated. Finally, although new research suggests that autistic people may communicate more effectively and more comfortably with other autistic people, we do not yet know if exactly how or why this occurs. The double empathy theory would suggest that having similar ways of understanding the world helps people understand each other and connect. Understanding whether there are specific ways of communication that underlie this connection could help us identify ways to bridge the gap in communication between autistic and non-autistic people. Social interactions are the gateway to many things, from buying a bus ticket to interviewing for a job. Because most people are not autistic, most social interactions fit the non-autistic communication style, but might not work for autistic people. Autistic people must navigate many social interactions that are difficult to understand. By finding out more about how double empathy problem plays out in real life, we can help non-autistic and autistic people understand each other better and help them meet in the middle. Improving our understanding of the ways that autistic and non-autistic people interact might help autistic people find it easier to spend time with non-autistic friends and family, as well as non-autistic adults, doctors, and employers. It may help people who are not autistic not leap to conclusion based on assumptions about how autistic people and be less judgmental of them. This research may also provide people who are not autistic with more creative and accessible ways of communicating with others. Overall, for both people who are autistic, those who are not, understand how each other's communications can help us build an understanding, making the world more inclusive and accepting of everyone. Okay. Explanations. There is a, let me, transitions. There is a quiz. Monotropism. Man, I wish this existed when I was in school. I might have to show some of this to my family. Now, oh wait, there it is. That's what I'm looking for. These are written in response. Presentation. Self-scoring. Yeah, I probably have to get out of all this. How do I list off? Science framework. Got it. Observational costs. Okay. Strongly agree. Made up self-reporting. Where's the quiz for it, though? Yeah. Non-pathological theory. Okay. About this. We can listen to the article. Cool. All right. I'm not a doctor. Board thinks self-diagnosing is bad. If in trouble finding when sitting. Okay. English. I sometimes become highly anxious by focusing on many possible solutions that might occur in a first. After a period of instability, I need a quiet, predictable environment. Yes. Sometimes I avoid talking because I cannot reliably predict how others will react, especially strangers. I mean, sometimes I talk too much after that point. Then I start getting nervous, and then I say, whatever's on my mind, I'm gonna say it. Suddenly, but at the same time, there are some times that I think about it that I did not talk. Yes. I'm so fascinated by many of the things. Oh, definitely. Yes. I often loop back to previous thoughts all the time. I sometimes accidentally say something to others find offensive and rude when I'm focusing on a task. I agree. I tend to do activities because I find them interesting instead of due to societal expectations. Yes. I often find engaging in stimming, fidgeting and rocking to be relaxing. The other thing I do is mess with my hair. Quite good at something if I'm not especially interested in. I disagree. People tell me I get fixated on things. I manage uncertainty by creating routines. I'm not much of a routine person, actually. I'm really not. Disagree. I usually mean what I say and no more than that. I mean, I do sarcasm, but it still would. I mean, unless I say I'm joking. Actually, no, I think that'd be a neither agree nor disagree. I find social interactions more comfortable if communicating about topic. Strongly agree. Find routines provide an important source of stability and safety. Say, I'm not much of a routines person. When I'm interested in something, I tend to be passionate about it. Oh my god. I rarely find myself getting stuck in loops of thought. I'm usually passionate a few topics at one time in my life. Yes. I find a problem I can't solve distressing and or hard to put down. Agree. I tend to feel quite self-conscious unless I'm deeply absorbed in a task. Absolutely. I often experience anxiety over matters I have little certainty over. If I care about this stuff... Well, wait. Well, even when I'm streaming, I'm deeply absorbed in a task. I sometimes say I'm sorry about it and talk about it on stream. I often experience anxiety over matters I have very little certainty over. Often when I'm focused on activities, I do not need to use the restroom. Neither agree or disagree. When I'm interested in a topic, I like to learn everything I can about that topic. Yes! Genshin, any reflections on that? I really find social... disagree. Rarely find social situations chaotic. It's distressing to be unexpectedly pulled away from something I'm engaged in. It can sometimes be very distressing. I can sometimes be very distressed about a topic that others think is... yes. I'm often engaged in activities I am passionate about to escape from anxiety. Yes. I often get struck thinking about all the possibilities that might come out. Oh my god, yes. Like, I will literally go through and plan out a conversation and all the possible routes of that fucking conversation if I'm highly stressed. When I'm working, I'm open to read. I need a quiet, predictable... kinda. Sometimes making a decision is so hard, I get physically stuck. Yes. Involvement in an activity of interest often reduces my anxiety level. Yes. I sometimes focus on an incident for substantial time, days up. I still pay attention to any of the jobs that I've been fired from. I will go over that day so many times on what I could have done differently. I struggle to concentrate in busy or unpredictable environments. I mean, I can, to some degree, tune it out. Disagree. I don't mind if someone interrupts me while I'm in the middle of an activity. I mean, when my mom comes up to try and talk to me while I'm doing something, I get annoyed with her and I always feel bad about it. I absolutely do. I have trouble filtering out sounds when I'm not doing something I'm focused on. Sometimes. I find it difficult to engage in a task of no interest, even if it's important. I agree. I often engage in lengthy discussions on topics I find interesting, even though my conversational... You know why I stream? Is so that nobody will interrupt me. How does that sound? I'm often totally focused on activities I'm passionate about, to the point I'm unaware of other events. I often notice details that others do not. I mean, sometimes. When there are lots of information to consider, I often struggle to making a decision. Yes. I often find it difficult to switch topics after engaging in an activity. Yes. Often lose time sense of time when engaging in activities I'm passionate about. Yes. Sometimes when I'm focused on an activity, I do not recall information I might need. Oh my fucking god. When I'm focused on events, on activities, I do not notice that... no, actually no. I noticed that. I find it easy to keep up with group discussions when everyone's... Neither agree nor disagree. I really find simultaneously holding eye contact and maybe verbal disagree. One of the things I've noticed is over time, since I'm more accepting of my autism and all this other stuff, is things that I put up with thinking that it's normal for you to kind of feel uncomfortable and all this other stuff, or anxiety and all this other stuff, because sensory and all this other stuff that I'd put up with because I thought that was normal. Everybody got, you know, had these things, and really it wasn't. And being able to recognize that now. Okay. Of course, suggests you're more monotropic than 60% of autistic. God damn it. And about 90% of allistic people based on the data in the initial version of damn. Damn. Well. Well. All right, if y'all want to watch, I'm gonna include this in the thing, but yeah. All right. I think that's the end of the stream for tonight. Yeah, that answers that. I'll link in the whole thing. I'm gonna split this video up into different sections on YouTube. Anyways, let's find somebody that great. Oh my god, that answers that. All right, we're gonna annoy Panda.
Suit me better.
Alright, y'all, this is Ishnai Ciarfox. I hope you have a good day or night, whenever it is, wherever it is you currently are. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and comment. Yep. I'm gonna laugh if it's like the end of his stream and then I'm showing up again. That's my luck with him. Hey, what are you doing? Here we go.